of Alderville First Nation, and I'm a longtime resident here in Alderville First Nation, having built my home here in 1995. So Alderville First Nation, the first survey took place in 1835 for the Mississaugas of the Bay of Quinte, and our people relocated here physically in 1837. So this reserve is it's situated on the south side of Rice Lake, and we are intersected by the Oak Ridges Moraine. We're actually part of we're encompassed by the green belt, and we're encompassed by the Greater Golden Horseshoe Planning Area. It saw our people leave the bay, in which they flourished and resided on a lot of the islands and the mainland throughout that region in the bay. Quite small in the grand scheme, and of course over the generations there's been encroachment issues, there's been a number of impacts that have influenced the community in one way or the other. They moved here under Methodist and government influence, if you will, and the impetus was to create farmers out of them. The first survey was one solid block, around 2,000 acres. Over time, there were additional parcels of land that were added to the reserve. Today we know them as the West Reserve, the East Reserve, Vimy Ridge, Sugar Island, but there was a desire by the First Nation to get closer to the water. You know, it's very strange that our people were a water people, the salmon people, and they were a canoeing people, a wild rice people, and then here they were plopped in the middle of a township that was heavily agriculture. So it took some time for our people to get back on the water so that they could continue to fish and to continue to harvest wild rice, continue to trap. And so it was a long, arduous process to gain parcels of land back on the water, close to the water. It would be known today as the additions to reserve process, basically. And today, Alderville, and we hear this term that we're kind of a checkerboard sort of community, but in the original main parcel, there are parts of land that are patent or private land, in fee simple, held by non-native people. And the reason for that is enfranchisement. And enfranchisement was one of the policies that came out of the 19th century, in which the government tried to entice First Nations people to give up their Indian status, and thereby doing that they would give up their land rights, their land holdings on the reserve. So it was a way to get rid of First Nations people and a way to get rid of the reserve. And it failed as well. And there was, I would say, a quiet resistance to that. It interrupted a lot of the cultural cycle, if you will. And so it really stymies the socioeconomic advancement of the people, because there's always this sort of federal Dominion government hovering over the people and imposing its will upon the people. And then that is amended, that locality system, location ticket system is amended, and then here in Alderville, not all communities, but it became the certificate of possession system, in which we hold CPs, as we call them, and that is about as close to private land that you get on the reserve. It really got in the way of any credible land planning, if you will. There was no land planning. That's really a new animal altogether. There were CPs given out in Alderville, for instance, that should never have been given out in the first place, because they were in a swampy or marshy area that should be protected. Those that should be protected. They are water recharge areas, for instance. We have protected one area in the community. It's called the Black Oak Savanna Tallgrass Prairie. And remarkably, through time, this parcel, which is about 150 acres, it remained relatively intact, so that the ecological features are still intact. The biodiversity is amazing. We have species at risk here. So it's quite remarkable how it didn't all fall under the plow. And so now today we manage that, and we have a real strong ecological program that protects the Black Oak Savanna Tallgrass Prairie. We just entered into First Nations land management. The First Nations land management process is, it sees a First Nation community, if it's ratified, take over about 30 to 40 of the provisions in the Indian Act that are related to land. We already have a protocol, and that is for external proponents, of course. I guess the big thing is for me, is land, acquisition of more land. We predate the numbered treaties by 40 years. But under the Williams Treaty Settlement Agreement, we have a legal entitlement to purchase an additional 11,000 acres. There's a large area within which we can purchase land in southern Ontario. But again, the desire would be to have more land acquisition closer to Alderville. But again, that is a huge challenge. The other challenge is the additions to reserve process. It's all well and good that we know that we can purchase 11,000 acres. How long will the additions to reserve process take to add that to reserve? You know, are we looking at 7 to 8 years for each parcel to come into the reserve? It's such a slow process that it'll probably, I know, it'll never be finalized in my lifetime. And so we have to assure that our future leaders coming up will have a good sense of how to acquire land. They'll have a good sense of how to hold the government's feet to the fire when it comes to the Williams Treaty Settlement Agreement, and that pressure will never be let off insofar as purchasing land. I've actually got phone calls from people that have inquired as to whether they could contribute land. You don't get that many, get calls like that too much, but I welcome municipalities, government, private interests. I welcome everybody's ideas insofar as how we can acquire more land.